Throughout the 1960s, Vincent Price's career would go from strength to strength as he continued his collaborative efforts with Roger Corman in his Poe adaptations, culminating in many much-loved classics such as The Mask of the Red Death, The Raven, or The Tombs of Ligeia. But he would also find a growing presence on television, appearing in dozens of programmes throughout the 1960s, including Get Smart, The Red Skelton Hour, and probably most infamously in Batman 66, playing the role of Egghead. In 1968, Price would land one of his most iconic roles, playing Matthew Hopkins in The Witchfinder General, and this would kick off a string of films that would ultimately end up featuring some of Price's most iconic performances. As the 60s gave way to the 70s, the decade would open with the film which I'd say a significant proportion of Price fans would list as one of their favourite performances. 1971's The Abominable Dr. Phibes. An American international picture, much like his Poe films, but a significant change of pace over the somewhat more grounded and plodding plots that those films seemed to end up with. Don't get me wrong, the Poe films are enjoyable, but because they're largely trying to invoke a period setting, a lot of the scripts tend to lean more towards the theatrical. And by that I mean they tend to be a little heavy on detail, a little heavy on over-explaining plot elements, and a little too keen to really try and push that this is a period piece. They're not bad, it's just that to 21st century sensibilities, they're films you can pretty much watch with your phone out and 10 to 15 minutes can go by without you really missing anything. Now Phibes is a totally different beast, and I don't know what that beast's been snorting, but it is riled up. The plot for this one, I think it's fair to say, is a bit of a weird one, in that it's pretty straightforward on a surface level, but the moment you even begin to examine it in even the tiniest bit of detail, it just explodes out into this sprawling and convoluted multi-thread plot about murder, revenge, ancient Egyptian curses, and the Charleston. So, the plot of Dr. Phibes, and at least for now I'm just going to try and keep it as simple as I can. So the film opens with a string of mysterious deaths under bizarre circumstances. Our first victim is dispatched by being attacked by a group of overly adorable vampire bats. The police and the coroners turn up to remove the body, and while discussing the bizarre death, the police discuss an equally strange case that happened only a short time ago, where another victim was killed by a surprise bee attack. It turns out that both of the victims were doctors. The police keep this information in mind, but they don't really do anything until another doctor winds up dead, this time having been strangled by a clockwork frog mask that, once put on and locked into place, slowly chokes the victim to death. Now, 2 doctors is a coincidence, but 3 doctors, all under bizarre circumstances involving animals? Well, that's a pattern, and the cops begin to panic about who or what is doing this, and more so, what'll happen if the press hear about these bizarre murders. They're just about getting into a position where they can deal with this when another doctor is dispatched via being paralysed and having all the blood drained from his body. In an attempt to be as proactive as possible, the police reach out to Dr. Vesalius, who's still alive, who worked with all the victims at one point or another with the aim of warning him about the mysterious deaths. While the Doctor attempts to try and figure out what himself and all of the other doctors may have had in common, news of the blood-draining murder reaches the police, and while investigating the crime scene, they find a strange medallion near the victim. They manage to track down the creator of the medallion, who informs the police that it was part of a set and that each medallion had a different symbol marked on them. Each symbol representing a curse that's linked back to the Book of Exodus, the curse of the pharaohs to be precise. And when they explore the curses, they find that each one aligns with a death that's happened with these doctors. So, armed with some new information, they return to Dr. Vesalius, who's been able to whittle down the list of possible cases that all these doctors worked together on to a single case. The case of Victoria Regina Phibes, a young woman who unfortunately died due to complications while undergoing emergency complex surgery. The immediate thought would be that maybe her husband, Dr. Anton Phibes, is responsible for the string of deaths as some kind of act of vengeance. Only, Dr. Phibes died while rushing to be by his wife's side when his chauffeur-driven automobile skidded off the road and down a mountainside, erupting into a ball of flames, killing all involved. Or did it? Yeah, they don't really try to hide this. It's obvious from minute one, but Phibes is still alive and is picking off the doctors who failed to save his wife as vengeance for their perceived act of murder. He managed to escape the burning wreckage of his car crash, and the crime scene investigators mistook his chauffeur's charred corpse for Phibes and had him buried in the family mausoleum, giving Phibes the perfect foil to exact his revenge. His aim? To exact his vengeance on the doctors using an Egyptian curse so that he may take his own life and join his wife in the afterlife. Due to the car crash, Phibes is unable to use his natural voice. Instead, he's created a means with which his voice is amplified via a device hooked up to a gramophone. He's also in heavy prosthetics for most of the film's runtime, making it difficult to see exactly what his actual face looks like, though the film alludes to it being all makeup and wax multiple times. As the bodies begin to pile up and Phibes gets closer and closer to his goal of exacting his revenge, will the police finally believe that he isn't really dead? Will Dr. Vesalius escape his fated curse? And just where can a guy buy a full-blown clockwork orchestra these days? What I've told you there is a super abridged version of the actual plot, because this film's kind of a bit all over the place. But not in a bad way by any means, it's fairly heavily front-stacked. In essence, the film gives you more or less the entire plot in the first 10 minutes, and then the rest of the film's pretty much a horror thriller because you as an audience member know what's happening and more or less what Phibes' goals are, and you're trained to pre-expect what's coming up. But because all of these reveals are put in front of you right at the beginning, you then have the tense job of watching the police and Dr. Vesalius having to figure out what you already know. And while that may sound a bit boring, it's really quite far from it, because the film itself is so surreal and unique visually that you just kind of focus less on the fact that all of the plot happenings are inevitable and focus more on just how stunning the cine and direction are. To kick things off, the script is a bit of a mixed bag. While I really like the premise and the actual story in and of itself, the structure seems a bit inconsistent to me. I'm not too keen on the way they handle Phibes' introduction to the plot. They more or less make it clear he's alive and well within 5 minutes of the film starting, which, to me at least, for the first act, kinda took a bit of the wind out of the sails for it. Especially given that this is a character who's predominantly in prosthetics throughout. You could have very easily set the first act up as, there's someone who's killing these doctors who looks like Phibes, but Phibes is dead, so is it really Phibes? And then use that as a kind of launch pad for the whole plotline about him faking his death but being horribly injured. I just feel like, because they go so out of their way in the first act to establish that it really, truly is Phibes, that it makes a lot of the police scenes where they're actively saying it definitely can't be Phibes because he's dead a little frustrating in places. It equally kind of diminishes the moment of realisation with the police that Phibes is alive because we've all been sat there for the last 30 to 40 minutes going, of course he is, we've bloody seen him bump off at least 4 doctors by this point. That's another thing as well. While the actual doctor murders are quite interesting, they do feel quite repetitive. After the first 2 or 3, the setups are more or less the same. Phibes breaks into a room, car or aeroplane in one case, of a doctor or nurse, and plants either killer animals or just drains all their blood. And that's about it. And like I say, while the deaths themselves are shot in an interesting way, that doesn't stop them feeling like a script going through the motions. It all leads to a fantastic third act showdown that I do really like, but because they kind of fumble the Phibes reveal, it means the first act lays all its cards on the table right away, leading to a second act that just kind of feels a bit fillery to me, before giving way to a super rushed 15-minute third act grand finale, which is good, but just super rushed. The pacing of the whole thing's a bit stop and start as well, with some death scenes being over in a couple of minutes and others taking a decent chunk of the movie's runtime to get through. Coupled with some sometimes painful dialogue scenes where it really does feel like it's just there to help pad out the runtime, and the result is a fantastic script story-wise that just kind of fumbles the execution a bit for me. This film was written by James Whitten and William Goldstein. James had 5 writing credits split between television and film, nothing really of massive note. I'd say his work on Phibes was probably his best known. He unfortunately passed away in 2016 at the age of 83. William has 3 credits, 2 for both of the Phibes movies and 1 for a film called The Amazing Doberman. Other than that, that's your lot. On the directing front, we have Robert Fust. He has 24 directing credits for a mixture of television and film. Out of these, I'd say his work on Phibes was probably his best known, though on the television front he did have quite a bit of success writing for both iterations of the UK's Avengers series. He sadly passed away in 2012 at the age of 84. And I've got to say here, while the script is a bit bumpy, I simply cannot fault the direction. What we have is quite possibly some of the finest horror visuals that the 1970s had to offer, and I really don't feel like that's an understatement. I think a lot of praise needs to be placed on the set designers for crafting such unique set spaces for Robert to work within. There's a certain sense of timelessness in Phibes. The general assumption is that it's set in the present. Well, the present as relevant to 1971. But really, it kind of plays with almost all eras. Phibes' main hub of operations having a distinctly 1920s vibe about it, but mixing technology from the Clockwork Band to more modern fashion senses, it's truly hard to gain a sense of perspective as to when this film is exactly happening. And while in 2021 it's clear to see that whenever this film is happening, it isn't happening now, the ability to narrow down exactly when it is happening between the 1920s and 1970s is surprisingly difficult. The whole thing's got a very nice Amicus-style gothic horror vibe about it, which helps tie the whole thing together, and the use of rich, lush and vibrant royal colours and an Art Deco approach just makes this film a truly timeless and unique experience to sit through. And Robert takes every opportunity to seize on that unique and distinctive design, crafting a clear and campy and slightly demented vision that I've only ever really seen captured in one other movie, which, well, we'll get to that one very shortly. In short, this film has a very clear and distinct vision about it, which really helps smooth over some of those bumpier elements in the script. I feel had this script been handled by a lesser filmmaker, it really would have showed up the faults in pacing and repetition. But because this film just looks so damn beautiful, it's tremendously easy to forgive. I will say that the direction of the cast, while definitely not bad by any stretch, is maybe just a smidge stiff in places. Particularly the police station sequences, which, while mercifully they're fairly few and far between, when they do pop up, everything kind of turns a bit Z-cars and grinds to a halt for a bit as we basically lock into a 2-shot with, at most, a mid-close-up and reverse of a bit of backing and forthing for a while. It's a bit bland when you have such fantastic and grand direction of the cast in every other scene outside of those. In particular, the way that Robert handles the Phibes lair sequences are just astounding. He really knows how to pull that manic energy out of Price & Co., which is even more impressive given that for the entire film's runtime, Price never opens his mouth. He really has a way to pull a fantastic physical performance from him. It's really excellent. The cine, for the time, is very impressive too. As mentioned, there are a few instances where it can be a little bit stiff in places, like the police station sequences, but barring the odd bit of stiffness, this is a surprisingly fluid production, with some lovely pans and sweeps of the grand and luxurious set pieces, and some really nice location work in places too. In fact, the only real criticism I could place on this one is, while it comes across as very rich cinematographically, it could have stood to experiment maybe just a little bit more. Like, I get this film is pretty arty looking and well shot, but I feel it's just missing maybe a little bit more experimentation. Just a little bit more work with coloured gels or macro shots or playing around with the panning and tracking, and I think this really could have been next level. On the whole, it's great, but I can't in good faith say it's genius. Performance-wise, again, it's complicated. Price is a sheer force in this movie. He's campy, over the top, and has to do a ton of acting with just his pure physicality in his eyes. And I for one think he absolutely nails it. I really can't see anyone else playing Phibes apart from Price. He just has that macabre nature pre-packaged in, and he plays to that gothic aesthetic perfectly. He really gives it his all in this, and I think he does a wonderful job. Equally, I think Joseph Cotten as Dr. Vesalius, once he gets going in the final act, delivers a simply sterling performance that really shines through. Though I can't really say much without spoiling the third act of this feature, but he's a definite highlight. The rest of the cast? Well, it's a bit of a sliding scale. The problem I feel lies in the fact that a decent chunk of the cast are television actors predominantly at this point in time, and as a result there is a very distinct whiff of television acting in this. At this point in time, television was still kind of being treated like theatre. Sets were predominantly built like a theatrical production, and the cast were basically instructed to perform in front of the camera as if they were performing to an audience in the theatre. And that's basically what we see here. There are just sequences that feel almost painfully like I'm watching a recording of a theatre performance, and a lot of them just lack that fluidity of a natural conversation. It was super common at this point in cinema history, and it'd be another couple of years before we'd really see a more fluid Hollywood acting style. But here, it feels stiff in places, dry, and, well, very much like a scripted conversation. Finally, the soundtrack. Big win. Big win. The use of sound in this movie is phenomenal, from the score itself, which utilises a mixture of string arrangements and 1920s style big band tunes to help further sell the weird time displacement element, right the way through to little things like how Phibes' voice box is quite tinny and raspy, giving it almost a radio-like quality. This feels special, kind of like a once-in-a-lifetime lightning in a bottle type moment. It's easily one of the best scores I've ever heard, and I'm more than happy to listen to this one, whether it's on its own or as part of the film itself. The Abominable Dr. Phibes isn't perfect, but it's a film that tries to strike out on its own, and in many regards it's just a purely delightful watch. It's a messy, absurd, mixed up piece of cinema, cult at some of its most expressive and finest. It may be a bit lumpy in some places and have a few bits that don't quite land, but on the whole, there's a lot to love with this picture. I can see why it's a firm cult favourite, and in spite of the flaws, I'm compelled to make it clear that this really is a movie you don't want to miss. As for me, well, I'm just going to be upfront. Next week we're covering a film that I consider to be one of, if not the greatest horror movies ever made. So, see you next time.